Welcome back to Beyond the Wrench. My name is Jay Goninen, and I am your host. Before we jump into today's episode, we want you to know that we care about your opinions as our listeners, and this is why we're giving you the opportunity to share with us topics that you'd like to hear on Beyond the Wrench. If you have a topic or guest in mind, be sure to send us an email at info@wrenchway.com. We want to make sure we are covering all of the topics you want to hear about, and the best way we can do that is to hear it directly from you. So please reach out to us. Again, that email address is info@wrenchway.com. For today's episode, I have with me Dan.shine from Automotive News, a senior editor at Automotive News, and just a really good person. He's got a lot of really cool things going on at Automotive News, and excited to have him here to talk today. So Dan, how are you doing?
Hey, doing great. Thanks for having me.
Good. Well, you put out all kinds of great content everywhere. It feels like I see an article from you each week or see something from you. How do you manage all your time and getting all this content out there?
I rarely sleep, so it can be a little crazy at times, but I enjoy what I do, so it's not really too much work.
No, it's cool. You put out a really, really good work. So let's start off like we do in most episodes and talk about your background and how you got to where you're at today. What got you in the automotive industry in the first place?
Well, I was in the newspaper business to begin with. I studied journalism at Michigan State, went and worked at two daily newspapers in Dallas and then in Detroit. Then I broke away and spent 16 years at the University of Michigan as a communications director at a think tank there. And just was looking for change. I was commuting about an hour each way up to Ann Arbor and back to my home in Detroit. And so I wanted something a little bit closer to home. And the great opportunity to Automotive News. And so I jumped at it. And so right about 6 weeks before the pandemic hit, I jumped in and instead of commuting an hour, I was walking to my kitchen table every morning and working from there.
But that's cool. So what made you want to get into journalism in the first place?
So I was born into a journalism family. My father worked at the same newspaper in Detroit for 47 years, rising from, working there as a part-time college student, and 47 years later he retired as publisher and president. Grew up around reporters all the time, these, crazy people in this business. I'm the youngest of six, and so we'd have these big, family dinners every night, and my father would bring home some new reporter just out of college, who didn't know anybody, so there'd always be one or two new faces at the dinner table every night. So I just, I spent a lot of Saturdays there when my father had to go to work, and my mother said, well, you got to take one of the kids with you. So I would go and run around the newsroom, and so this is kind of a magical place, so I loved to write, and so I wasn't good at math, wasn't good at science, so this seemed to be
pretty
my
natural.
destiny. Yeah.
Yeah. So he had to have met some interesting people. I mean, in Detroit with a publication, I mean, you're in the hometown of basically the automotive industry, right? Like everything started in Detroit, and between automotive and sports and like there's just music, there's so much that happened in Detroit during his time. I have to imagine he met some cool people.
Yeah, I think there was a time when, before he passed away, that I think he shook every president's hand from Eisenhower all the way through, through Clinton, I want to say.
Wow.
And so, yeah, we had Lord Snowden came and had brunch at our house one time. He was married to Princess Margaret at the time, and it was, that's what kind of interests me in newspapers. It's just something new every day. You're kind of an eyewitness to a lot of history, and so it just seemed like a fun job to do.
Yeah, I feel like I know for a fact my dad has not shaken any president's hand, so he's definitely got. I'm guessing your dad just had some amazing stories to tell.
Yeah.
And the people that you were able to meet, I mean, just to have brunch, I mean, that's insane. There's zero chance any of my friends ever had that opportunity.
Yeah, I was 11 or 12 at the time. I didn't really grasp it, But a quick funny story I'll tell you. So my grandmother's from Ireland, and so she didn't have a lot of love for the British. And so my father didn't invite her to the brunch because he knew that she would cause trouble. But she was coming over for dinner, and the brunch lasted, well into the afternoon because Lord Snowden was having a great time. And so my grandmother showed up, and so my father was like, "Oh, this is going to be bad." And so they start talking, and she starts making a couple of, remarks, and so she just talked about how she left Ireland because she didn't want to be like, curtsying and bowing, to people as she backed out of her room and stuff. And this was like a land of opportunity. We don't have to bow or curtsy to anybody in this country. And then she said, "Well, I'll give a toast to the Queen." So there was people from the British consulate in Detroit were there and stuff, and they all said, "Oh, to the Queen." And they all raised their champagne glasses, and my grandma said, "Up her kilt." So everyone was aghast. Of course, Lord Stone thought it was hilarious, and later gave my grandmother his phone number at Kensington Palace and said, "Next time you're in London, you got to call me. We're going to go out."
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, so
that is insane.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. So then the whole kind of journey just led you to where we're at today, right? And what you're doing with Automotive News. Can you talk to us a little bit about what your job entails at Automotive News?
So I wear two hats at Automotive News. So first is I'm editor-in-chief of Fixed Ops Journal, the magazine that comes out every other month, covers the service and parts and collision industry and dealerships. And then my other hat is I oversee coverage of finance and insurance at dealerships. So we have two reporters on staff who produce a weekly digital newsletter, and then we also once a month have a page in the Automotive News, and then every quarter we have a big section, a big 10-page, 12-page section of F&I news. So those are my two worlds that I kind of traipse in.
So it was pre-pandemic, probably kind of a crash course on everything fixed ops and how broad this industry is. I mean, there's so many different elements to this industry. I'm guessing it's probably refreshing to learn something a little bit different, but then also just a challenge of grasping this entire thing.
Yeah, the fixed ops was, it's all been kind of a steep learning curve, but I'm still learning it and figuring out what, ELR means and all this kind of, stuff and how to calculate that. But that involves numbers and math, and then I'm not good at that either. So, but, I was lucky enough to, kind of embed with, a fixed ops directors meeting early on. Right, actually as the world shut down, I was over in Phoenix at this meeting. So I've been able to kind of immerse myself a little bit. And with the help of a lot of good, friendly people in the service business who kind of take me under their wing and teach me about all these things. It hasn't been so bad, and F&I is still a challenge because it involves numbers. And again, I'm a writer, and numbers are just a scary thing for me.
They didn't say anything about numbers when they hired you. They're like,
I said nobody said math. Nobody mentioned anything about math when I took this job.
Well, I think the cool part about our industry, though, is there are so many people that are willing to jump in and help, and seeing as you've come into the industry, the amount of relationships that you've been able to make and really the connections that you've been able to put together, and even the evolution of the type of content in the course of the last couple of years. I mean, it's not just fixed ops, but it feels like a lot has changed in terms of how you deliver that content. You just had your Fixed Ops, was it Fixed Ops Forum?
Yep, yes.
And that was awesome. I mean, the amount of great people you got onto the forum to talk about some pretty crazy things in the industry, it was pretty cool to see. I mean, you did a really good job putting all that together.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, and thankful to all the people who agreed to take time out of their busy schedules to sit down with me and answer my questions. And so yeah, it's great. And we're trying to do more of that. It's the publishing business is evolving and changing, and a lot more people consume their news in different ways now. We still have a very robust print subscriber, but there's a lot of people who read Automotive News only online or on their phone, and so we are kind of trying to adjust to meet them where they are.
As you say that, I've got Automotive News sitting directly next to me, so I am a big fan of everything that you guys do, and the quality and content and the depth of the content, I think, is really good. I want to ask you about the writing itself, right? Like, what goes into it? How do you even select what you're going to write about? Can you tell me a little bit about the process of actually writing an article?
Sure. So, if it's a good month or a good magazine, that means I'm not writing hardly anything. But sometimes, when there's things follow through or we need it, we got extra space, then I'll come in. And I love writing, but it's just I've got enough on my plate. So for the magazine, it comes out every other month, and so once even before let's say, like, we're working on the December issue right now, but I was working on that in September and kind of putting together stories and ideas, and they'll come from sometimes my staff is all freelance. Right? I have one staff writer, Richard Truitt, but he's part-time. He kind of writes about Jaguar and Land Rover. He writes about engineering issues at Automotive News. So when he can, he'll lend his voice to Fixed Ops Journal. The rest of the staff are all freelancers, people who have regular 9-to-5 jobs, but maybe will do something after work, or they're freelancing for 2 other publications that might not even be automotive related, but they write for me as well. And so it's kind of coordinating them, coming up with ideas. Again, if I see something on LinkedIn that sounds interesting, if I listen to your podcast or other podcasts and I hear a good interesting guest talk about an issue they're having, then I'll say, that sounds like a good story. And so I'll always just kind of like we put out our digital newsletter today, and I already got an email from fixed ops director at a Subaru shop in Arizona, and he said, hey, when's your column? I said, okay, well, I'm going to give you a call next week. We'll just catch up. And so I make a lot of phone calls to people, just kind of checking in, what's going on in your shop, what are the challenges you've seen, what are some of the things that you've had success doing. So it's a lot of, it's just a lot of phone calls and just kind of reading things to come up with story ideas that I think are relevant and that, that are timely. And then it's a matter of assigning them out to the writers I have, and see what kind of capacity they have to write them. And I'll give them kind of a length. This seems interesting. I'll give you 1,400 words, which is, probably like a 2-page spread. This is not as interesting. Let's just do 700 words as 1 page. Make sure you get photos and things like that. So a lot of, so there's always a lot of moving parts. And, sometimes, most of the time they'll come in and they'll turn the story in when they're supposed to. Sometimes the deadline slips by, they can't reach people they're supposed to reach. So then they got to find something else that maybe is already done to put in its place. So it's a lot of always, kind of shuffling the deck chairs quite often. But, it's can be, sometimes it's, you only got a couple of days to write something. Sometimes, they have 2-3 weeks. So it kind of just depends on how big the subject is.
So very deadline driven, right? Like where
yes.
you've got to meet your deadlines. It's like I feel like there's been TV shows where that's like kind of the theme of where got to get our deadline. So it's interesting that's that's your reality. That's what you live in is the world of deadlines.
Yeah, it's always looming. I mean, I know I have an F&I section that is continuing to grow each day because more ads are being sold, which means I have to produce more stories for it. And, every time I think about it, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like right around the corner. And like, we are not prepared at all, and then right on its heels will be, our production week for the magazine. And I'm always unprepared. I'm like, oh my, this is never going to work. We're going to we're going to fail. We're not going to publish a magazine. And I got a great designer, Steve Massey, always says, shine, it'll get done. Don't worry, And it always, so far, it always has gotten done. So
it always turns out really good. I am always impressed with the quality of articles and what you put out there. And I just think you having those connections and having your ear to the ground in terms of what's happening and just really understanding the pulse of the industry, you've done such a good job at understanding that up front. So I commend you for that, because that's
Thank
not
you.
the easiest thing in the world to do, is stay on top of everything. But you do a good job with that.
If you're enjoying Beyond the Wrench, remember to follow and rate our podcast to help support the show. Right now, we would like to give a shout out to this week's sponsor, Universal Technical Institute. Since 1965, Universal Technical Institute has trained thousands of students to pursue their dreams, If you want to train for an exciting career in transportation, skilled trades, or energy, UTI may be the school for you. You'll learn how to work with tools and equipment from some of the world's top brands like BMW, Ford, General Motors, Daimler Trucks, and more. That's why many of these brands recruit UTI grads when hiring. Develop your skills in state-of-the-industry labs. Train in a blended learning format designed to mirror the industry. You can graduate in less than a year, and their career services department is here to support grads as they launch their careers. UTI has a national reputation with a variety of programs to choose from at campuses across the country. You'll learn the skills you need in a hands-on environment that doesn't feel like a traditional school. See how you can get started today. Disclaimer: some programs may require longer than 1 year to complete. UTI is an educational institution and cannot guarantee employment or salary.
Now, what I want to talk about the industry in general now, where try to pick your brain a little bit about what are the hot topics that are out there right now. What is it that everybody's talking about or that people are fired up about? What are you hearing?
Well, it's a lot of the things we've been talking about for a long time, and it's continues to be, the big challenges for dealerships, and it's, labor shortage, turnover for service advisors just continues to be huge. Sometimes I'll be upwards of 50%, which is crazy. I've got a coworker here who has a Jeep Grand Cherokee, and he made an appointment to take it into to a CDJR store. And they said, well, you're going to have to leave it here for 2 weeks before we can even look at it. He's like, wait a minute, what? He didn't tell me that. He said, I've been trying to call you. And he said, well, we only have 2 service advisors. Everyone else has quit. And so he said, well, let me just bring it in 2 weeks. And they said, we're still going to have to wait. So he said, we're just going to bring it in. Yeah, it's going to sit here. And then when we have time, we'll look at it and diagnose it and let you know. So the labor shortage continues to be, bad. Advisors, technicians, always, right? It's can't find enough technicians. If there were enough technicians, I think fixed ops departments would be going gangbusters right now. They're still doing very well, but I think they could all use 2, 3, 4 more technicians. The chip shortage, obviously, still a problem. Repairing cars also, for collision and for maintenance. I was at a party with a guy who works for Ford. So one of the beauties of living in Detroit, I was at a party. There were like 4 people from Ford there, and this guy was in parts, and he was like one of the chips guys. And he's like, oh my god, I'm like, always looking for chips. And he was like talking about that tug and pull of, okay, well, we have a part, but it's supposed to go on the new F-150 on the line at the Ford Rouge plant, not some Ford dealership in Wixom, Michigan to repair it. So there's this whole kind of tug and pull of where does this precious part go to, the new car or the car that's being repaired. So that's still an issue, which leads to kind of customer satisfaction. You tell a customer's going to be 2, 3, 4 weeks, they're not going to be happy. Even if it's a legitimate reason, nothing you can do. EV readiness, I think, is just kind of one of those issues that just kind of is out there, lurking in the shadows, where I think a lot of folks aren't really paying too much attention to it because it's not real yet.
They know it's there, but they're kind of like, you know what? I'm just going to keep doing this, and then when that actually pushes its way in, then we'll let it in, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting change for dealerships, service departments, but one I think they'll handle. Whether some I know have been prepping for a year already, and some are like, well, when we start getting them, we'll deal with it then. So, they'll manage somehow. And I also think there's, going back to text about pay plans and how do you reward them, how do you give them annual bonuses to keep them there. Customer retention is always a thing. So, it's in some ways it's a lot of the same stories, but I'm always kind of looking for the new approaches, the new best practices to solve these ongoing challenges. And then there's always new ones that pop up. What I've tried to do more is more feature stories and more stories about people behind the industry a little bit, and kind of humanize the department a little bit more than it has been in the past.
Well, it takes it. I mean, it does take some talent to do that storytelling. I think a lot of times you can do the storytelling maybe while kind of giving an update on something as well. And I think that's what you guys excel at. I am curious, being in Detroit, you have a unique level of probably understanding the OE side, the dealer side, and like I think one of the things I learned growing up in the industry, and then once getting into the dealership side of things, was learning how adverse at times that OE dealer relationship can be, and trying to, for you not being one-sided in that argument or anything like that, just trying to tell the story. Is that hard to do, where you go and maybe you've got a friend at a dealership that it's like, oh man, the OE doesn't know what they're doing. They can't get chips out, and the OE's like, hey, we're trying. We're really trying. We just can't get them. Does that put you in kind of a unique predicament where you kind of get stuck in the middle?
It can happen, but not too often, and at least for me.
Yeah.
But over my 17, 18 years, doing this, you kind of learn that, hey, let me hear your side of the story. Let me hear this guy's side of the story, and I'm going to put them both out there equally and fairly, and folks can decide who's wearing the black hat and who's wearing the white hat in this, or maybe they're both wearing black hats. So. But no, you're always going to upset people sometimes who don't think they're getting a fair shake, but that comes with the territory. So it's nothing that really bothers me too much.
Well, that's good. I do want to talk about so labor shortage is obviously near and dear to my heart. That's what our business is all about. But I'm curious as to, in your time in the industry so far, if you've seen gains there. Like you see maybe a broader scope or a different, I guess you see this through a different lens than maybe I would. Do you see progression with the dealer network and how they're approaching this?
Dealer network, yes, but also I think there are a lot of entities that are working their way towards this and trying to solve this. And I think we're talking about, like, I could write a story every issue about technician shortages, but I could also write a story every issue, or maybe probably more, about people who are trying to solve it. I mean, the community count. I don't know if it'll be in the December issue or sometime in January. But there's a story about a college out in the LA area has got a big infused bunch of money for their automotive training program. I just got a notice about another one. So there's always these stories about this school getting $3 million for their automotive tech programs, and this school getting $5 million, whatever it might be, and all this new equipment. So I think there's a lot of effort being put towards the problem, and so I think and I think there's an awareness, more maybe than there has been in a while, that they have to, tech have certain needs too, and they want certain things. This maybe generation of workers has a different kind of mindset than maybe people our age, and as far as like how long they're going to work and how many days they're going to work, and wouldn't it be nice to have a 3-day weekend, or things like that. And these are kind of, I think, dealerships are trying to solve these problems and maybe come to the table with more than they have in the past, where it was kind of like, well, if you don't like it, hit the road and we'll find somebody else. Now it's, there are these great programs of, annual bonuses. The longer you stay, the retention bonuses, the longer you stay, the more money at the end of the year you get in your paycheck. And I think, that's appealing for a lot of techs.
I think you hit that on the head, where 5 years ago, it was only, and this wasn't automotive news specifically, but at one point it did feel like we were becoming numb, because every time you opened a paper or every time you read something online, it was about the technician shortage. And, I think even for me in this business, it was almost becoming, I think people were becoming numb to it, right? You could only read the same Bureau of Labor Statistics stats over and over and over again so many times before you're like, yeah, I get it. Like, we have a big problem. but now the shift to focusing on the solution and focusing on the things that are helping, I think is so impactful, and it shows. I think that maybe the cool part to me is the willingness of everybody in the industry to kind of step up and try to do it better, right? Like to try and work together, collaborate on things that, we can do to help get more people into this industry and make it a better place for the people that are already here. And to me, that's one of the more rewarding things that I've seen. And I think in print media, that's something that I've seen a shift too. And you talked about that there, where not talking about the problem as much anymore, but talking about ways that we can fix that. It sounds like that's kind of the approach that you went with.
Right. It's right. I could write a story every time. Here's how many techs the industry is lacking. What I'm always curious about is, okay, who's has good approaches? Who's having success? And I was actually at a kind of a small fixed ops gathering. It was in May. And there was a gentleman there, fixed up director from a large group down in Florida, and he was talking about they have kind of a mentoring program, and it's been very successful. They have like these great numbers of how many they've been able to attract and retain. And I was like, I want to write about this. And he said, well, we're kind of like, we don't want to, I don't think they wanted to share the secrets with the world. And so, which I run into every once in a while. It's like, I'm not going to tell you the secret sauce, but I'm going to tell you that it tastes really good. But it really kind of bummed me out, because I said, this is a great story. This would be really helpful to other people to say, here's how this group's doing it. Here's the success they've seen. You may want to try this. So, but that's kind of my focus is always, looking for new approaches that are proving to be successful.
Isn't that funny though? Because that is a weird conundrum that we find ourselves in as an industry is, you might have a best practice as a dealership, but your willingness to share it might not be too open, because you don't want that might be your competitive advantage, that you don't want your neighboring dealer to know that. And at some levels, I think that's hurt us in this shortage of labor. And the reason I say that is we just had a conversation with a bunch of schools a few weeks back on one of our roundtables, and it was funny because I had brought it up, and I hadn't even thought about it prior to our conversation that we were having in the roundtable. But what we talked about was, when you get in an advisory committee meeting, it's one of the more awkward things, because what you're doing, the school brings in all of industry. Oftentimes it's competitors sitting right next to each other, and they're asking for feedback on the program, and the school's asking, for best practices. What can we do to better help your shops out? And the amount of people that sit on their hands and won't talk because they're afraid of giving away their trade secrets is mind-blowing to me. It's really, really hard to get anything done when nobody will talk. We're trying to generate and stoke the fire, but then there's that hesitance, and I totally get it. Like, if you don't want to give away your secret sauce there, but I also think that's part of the reason as to why we're where we're at today, right? Like, we're in this position because we were so kind of on our own islands for so long.
Luckily, it doesn't happen very often if we approach somebody and say, hey, we want to write about your successful parts program, or the way that you're recruiting advisors, or whatever it might be. And for the most part, people are very willing to do that. And this one was one of those rare occasions where they were like, he was very nice. I would love to, but the word up, from up above is we're not doing that. So, okay.
I do think that's changed too. I think you're right there, and I'm always shocked at the amount of people that will come on our podcast and talk freely about their business and openly, and really, I think with good hearts, right? Like they want to help the industry out, and I think at the end of the day, the way to fix this labor shortage is to get everybody on the same page and really have a collective push to have more of a presence in schools and be better places to work, quite frankly. I think that's one of the core issues is there's still shops out there that aren't treating their people very well, and we've got to fix that. And it could be something as simple as maybe they didn't have the leadership training up front. They were a technician that was promoted into that manager's role, or a service advisor that was promoted into that manager's role. And we don't do a great job at kind of training them up to get them to that point, but it does feel like we're starting to move that direction.
I think there are organizations that are trying to kind of lead the way and to some success. And right, I think there's more of an awareness that this is a problem that everybody in their own way can help solve. And again, it could be as small as a boot allowance or a tool allowance, or meals on the weekends when they're when the techs are in turning wrenches on a Saturday or Sunday. All those things go a long way to making it a nice place to work. And that and I think we did an interview with Carlisle Company, and they do a lot of great benchmarking surveys, and that was like the biggest thing. It was like, I just want to be a place that's enjoyable to come to work at, and that it treats me well, and like they're happy to see me and they appreciate what I do. And unfortunately, there are places that are not like that.
No, we had a shop talk to us. So a while back, they didn't end up being a client, and it was probably a good thing, but just openly talking about how they were proud of how little they paid their people. And I'm like, oh, our industry's regressing. Like, no, that's not the way we want to go,
Right. That would be a good slogan on the website.
No, we pay our people terribly.
Yeah.
I don't think that you might struggle a little bit more to get people.
We just launched our new weekly game on Shop Talk, The Loneliest Number. Each week, we will post short poll questions on Shop Talk about industry topics. Technicians who answer the questions will earn points to play the game and get a chance to win our $1,000 weekly prize. $500 will go to the lucky winner, and the other $500 will go to a local high school program picked by the winner. Start playing now at WrenchWay.com/ShopTalk. Link is in the show notes.
How do you go about, so I think it can be really easy to be negative in storytelling in regard to a lot of the problems that we have in our industry. And then conversely, it can be hard because if you're trying to just paint this really bright rainbow positive picture on something that's not great, how do you control kind of that narrative of like it being overly positive or overly negative, but actually just trying to get the good kind of stuff out of it?
Well, I mean, it takes a good writer to begin with. And like when I'll assign a writer a story, we'll talk about it over the phone. And I have an idea of in my head what this story is going to be about. And here's why I found it appealing in the first place. Here's why I think it resonates, because X, Y, and Z. So talk to them about that and see what they say. And when in our business, if someone's a bad actor, it's our job to call them out as a bad actor. For me in Fix Up Journal, especially, we're looking to highlight the good that's going on, or even if there are challenges, there are struggles, we're trying to look at people who are coming up with solutions. And that's not to say that we're just we're all rose-colored glasses here, and we think it's all about. But we're not like searching out to make anybody look bad or to paint anybody in a bad light. We're trying to find solutions. I think that was kind of the mandate when they started Fixed Out Journalism. We want to be educational, and that's what I always, when I go into, assigning stories, or thinking of good stories. Is this going to be helpful to the readership? Is the readership going to read this and say, "Oh, that's an interesting perspective that they have," or "That's an interesting way that they're going about it"? Maybe I'll try that. That's kind of what my kind of goal is. My mission is to make it educational, is to be, about sharing best practices, and also highlighting the people behind the work that's being done. Here's, the life maybe outside of the store. So that's, kind of my philosophy, and it usually has worked out well for me. And
yeah,
again, I'm not looking to throw bombs on anybody.
Do you know? So I know you're not a numbers guy, but One of my favorite parts of the magazine is, what is that? Probably, it's normally pretty early in the magazine, but the breakdowns of stats that you'll have where you're pulling stats from different areas. And for me, when I'm reading that, it gives me a page where I have a pretty good sense of where we're at in whatever it is that you're talking about, just based on how you've got it laid out. I don't know what the most popular part of the magazine is, but for me, that's probably the number one page I go to right off the bat.
I'm thinking of a service counter, and it's always one of the hardest things for me to find and fill out, because it's got to go out and find numbers every twice a year I can count on any DA supplying like a great annual report and a mid-year report. So I'm like, okay, I got two of the 6 issues covered, but on the other 4, I'm like, I got to go find stuff. And so where can I find some relevant numbers that aren't too old? And so it's always kind of like one of these things, like, oh, I got to go. One of the last things I write for the magazine is published is like, okay, I got to go find some numbers. So, well, I'm glad you enjoy it. I will keep searching for numbers just for you.
Yeah. I'll keep reading it because it's really good stuff. Now, how do you? One of the big things that I take pride in is being able to get the voice of technician out there, and I think being able to hear directly from technicians how they feel about the industry and some particular subject, whether it is retention or happiness in the workplace or what's attractive to other technicians. Is it hard to find technicians that you feel comfortable doing a story on for something like that? Or, walk me through that process, because a lot of them, they're not very visible, right?
Right.
It's unfortunate, but there's so many good stories out there with technicians that are just killing it. And you guys have done a good job in that capacity, at least being able to put some visibility behind that.
So it's difficult because, it's not like they have a phone at their desk or their cell phone number. So you've got to go through people. Like you got to call the service director, the fixed op director, and say, hey, can I talk to so-and-so? And they'll like, oh, and they may stop right there. Well, we don't,
what do you want?
We're a little wary of the press. What do you like? Are we in trouble? Did we do something wrong? And it's like, here's why we want to talk to this person. So it's just a chore just to get to them. And they're busy. They're not like reading around reading a magazine and waiting for you to call them. They're like busy working. So like if you try and reach them, it's you got to leave them a voicemail, and maybe they'll call you back, maybe they won't, and if they forget. So it's always a challenge. That's one of the biggest challenges we have. It's just service directors, service managers, fix out there. They're always busy, and so they're never at their desk for the most part. They're out wandering the shop, and so you leave a voicemail. It may take you 4, 5, 6 calls before you even get a return call. And luckily, I've started to know some of these folks, and so I have cell phone numbers, and so I can text them or call them on their cell and say, hey, But one of the things that I really liked that we did was tech that Russell Wickham.
Yep. And
this was just I'm reading LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm just reading people in the industry and posting stuff, and he was posting all these things about his struggle to find fulfilling work, a place that he can feel valued. And he was very open and honest and was a very good writer about laying out, here's how I'm feeling about things. Here's what I want in life. Is that so much? And it was just really, I thought it was compelling. And so, I was able to track him down and said, hey, would you write a guest column for us? I think, what you've written in LinkedIn is you're a good writer. You've got a lot to say, obviously. And, we'd love to have your voice because we just don't have that voice very often. It's the service manager, service directors for the most part, right? And so he did, thankfully. And, in an odd kind of way, this past week, I think either in the December issue or in January, we're going to have a story about Techion, which is kind of one of these, the newer kind of faces on the DMS space. And I've been wanting to write about them for a while. And the writer turned in the story and stuff, and he talked to a couple of people who are using it. But I remember seeing a couple of LinkedIn posts by Russell talking from a technician standpoint how much he liked Techion. And so I reached out to him. I said, hey, we'd love to have your voice in this. It's a different voice. it's not the service manager or service director, it's a technician, someone who's, in a different place, but still using the technology. And what do they think about it? So I wrote to him, I said, hey, would you, I want to talk to them about what do you like about tech and what is it different than the other ones you've used? So he wrote back and said, here's why I like it. And so I put it in the story because it's relevant and it's just a different voice than what we typically have. And so, I was glad to be able to do that.
Yeah, and there's different perspective there. And I think I know which post you're referring to with Russell, and I've had conversations with him and think a lot of him because he does have a good I think he says what a lot of technicians want to say, right? Mm-hmm. And he was lucky enough to find a spot that is really good to him. And it is, it is a small world. I think he had gone through the WrenchWay app to find that. And that was like, it was as I was reading it, in my mind, I was like, oh, this is what it's all about. This is why we're doing this. This is like, we want somebody like Russell who, like, at some point could have just left the industry. He's talented enough to go do other things, and luckily enough found a place that really, I don't know, they value him, and he's vocal about that on LinkedIn as well, and being able to kind of put out his journey. And it's been an eye-opener because I do think there's other technicians out there that think exactly the same way he does. They see the same things he does, and for him to be that, I don't know, open about his journey, I think has been really cool for me to see, specifically through LinkedIn, but just in my conversations with him in general. It's fun conversations to have.
And the funny thing about that story was that I read it and I said, this is a good story. I said, and so I talked to one of my freelancers who's my favorite writer, my best writer, and I said, I want you to write this story. I said, here's what it is. And then, I kind of laid it out in a phone call, and I followed up with an email. And then he called me back a couple of days. Said, I'm still not getting this. I'm not what's, and I said, no, this is a good story. You got to believe me. It's this is a guy who's giving voice to the voiceless. He's a very good writer. He's got a platform that he likes and feels comfortable on. And he is saying, like you said, what other techs would love to say, but are unable to for whatever reason. I said, this is a great story. And I said, plus, he's finding a job. He's found a job. This is when he first, started out there in Tampa, and then I said, so then you got to ask his new boss, are they nervous that he's going to blast them on LinkedIn if they screw up and stuff? And they were saying, oh no, we're comfortable with that and stuff. But it was kind of interesting. I had to kind of do a little bit of convincing to my writer, saying, oh, this is worthwhile. This is what we want to do. So. Yeah.
Well, shout out to his managers though, because that level of security in themselves to say, hey, you know what, we're going to let him do his thing, and trust that he's not going to paint us in a negative light. It was refreshing to me, to hear that, because I think that's a reason that so many technicians don't talk about their experience, is because they're afraid of getting thrown under the bus, or they're afraid of possibly getting fired because of something. And it sets us back a little bit, because then we can't have honest conversations. We can't talk about a technician's experience and make this industry a better place. So the fact that you took the time to have your people reach out and have a good conversation with him, so that you do have a full understanding of where technicians stand, I think is hugely important. It's I think moving forward, having technicians a seat at the table to where they can talk about this is the only way we're going to progress as an industry.
Yeah, it's very true.
How do you see opportunities for that moving forward? More so, to get more of the Russell Wickhams out of the abyss and talking?
Yeah, to me, a good story is a good story, no matter who it's about. And and if they have an interesting story to tell, or they have a perspective that's interesting to tell, then that's the kind of stuff we're looking for. It's not because they're techs that maybe we haven't put them in as much as we should. It's just more of it. They're unseen and unheard a lot of times in this leadership world. They're in the back and they're working, and And so, the managers and the directors are kind of the spokespeople for the department. So the answer is, yes, we love, again, good stories are good stories, and it doesn't matter who's it about.
Well, and technicians have some crazy stories. I grew up in a shop, and just knowing the people that I've known throughout my life and the differences in their backgrounds, this is, again, something we say in a lot of content, but we as an industry kind of can be guilty of painting all technicians as one person. We use the demographic of like, hey, every technician likes to hunt and fish, and they like this one thing. And I said, at one of the last shops that I managed, one of our best techs was 62 or 63 years old, but was a hardcore gamer. I would have never, ever, like in my life, thought you would run into that, where he was staying up until like 2 a.m. every single night playing games. He would take vacation time, not to travel, not to go ride four-wheelers, but literally would play whatever game that he was playing for like a week straight. Like he like a self-admitted geek when it came to video gaming. And I'm like, that was one of the first times where the light bulb went on with me, and I'm like, oh, maybe these people have different backgrounds. They're not, it's not like it's all one type of technician. They have hobbies.
Yeah, it's I mean, that's the great thing about flex ops industry is that there's just people from all different kind of backgrounds and all walks of life, and not all grew up with the grease under their fingernails. That they came from different walks of life and started a second or third or fourth career doing what they're doing in the industry right now.
From a content standpoint, kind of looking forward, we had talked about kind of that gigantic elephant in the room, which is electrification, and a lot of these dealers sitting there looking at this, that it's coming. I know you look at maybe a Ford with the mandates that they've got coming to their dealers, and they're not alone. I mean, it's every manufacturer is adapting to this, and I think at times you look at it and it's hard to balance like current day versus what's coming, and from maybe that dealer standpoint, or any shop for that matter, like understanding like, okay, we still have to take care of business today, and it's really important, but we know this thing is coming down the road. I know for me personally, this is a terrible, terrible habit to be in, but when I'm going through Fixed Ops Journal or Automotive News or whatever publication, I tend to earmark those the electrification articles and think that I'm going to go back and read them, and then I don't do a good job at going back and reading them. So I'm curious, like, how do you balance new technology with what we're dealing with today?
Yeah, I think for the people I talk to, it's like I said, they know it's out there, but they're focused on the here and now, and they think, even though the manufacturers say, oh, by 2025 or 2027, we're going to be 100% of whatever it might be, they still, in their heart of hearts, and they're probably true, that we're going to have internal combustion engine vehicles on the road for years and years to come. And so there's still going to be need for people to come in and get those vehicles serviced. And so while I know, right, the reality is that EVs are down the road a little bit, there's still, I think, questions to be asked of dealership service departments. How prepared are you? And if a lot of them say, we're not prepared at all, or we're not worried about that yet, then that's the story. But if they're saying, oh, we're doing this and we're doing that, and we're little by little we're doing this, we're creating another safe bay here, and we're going to expand, and then that's the story too. So I don't. I think I'm kind of focused more on the here and now too. Like here are the issues right now.
Yeah,
EVs are interesting and something to be considered and talked about, but not overly obsessing about at the moment.
I don't think you're going to run out of things to talk about for a while with with everything that we've got coming. I look through it. I look through the lens of a technician a lot, and that's one of the concerns that I've got for technicians is, how are we going to stay on top of this stuff moving forward? There's so many moving pieces right now, and I'm talking through the lens of a technician, but you look at that dealer principal, you look at that fixed ops manager or director, and you look at even the sales manager. How do you stay up with being able to stay up on the latest trends of vehicles? Like, it's so many moving parts. It feels like we're kind of transitioning to like the tech industry, where it's something different every single day.
Yeah, it's like you have feet in two worlds, and you're trying to grasp on both. And I think EVs are it's going to be interesting because it's still a car, but it's a whole kind of different animal, and it's just a different way that you got to treat it and care for it. And there's more danger to it than your regular ICE vehicle. So it's right. You're a little bit in the you're in the manufacturing from the 1900s, and then you're also in the high tech world as well. And you're kind of straddling both worlds right now.
Yeah, it's interesting to say the least. Now, moving back to kind of your role in your job, I'm curious what gives you the most satisfaction. What do you like the most about your job?
It's I think meeting interesting people, focusing, spotlighting, good people. We have a running feature in the FOJ called Spotlight, where we just write a short little profile, and then we have kind of 15 answer questions. What was your first job? What was your first car? What was the first concert you went to? If you could have 3 people at dinner, living or dead, who would they be? Those kind of fun questions, and I've gotten the biggest kick out of that, to be honest with you, more than the cover stories and all that other stuff. And so it's, I think, kind of just maybe shining a light on people who maybe aren't recognized as much, and kind of humanizing the people in the industry. I'm even though I grew up in kind of this hard news environment, I'm covering police and crime and courts and things like that. I still like feature writing. I like to write about people and their journeys along the way, and what they've always done, and what their hobbies are and their passions are outside of the auto industry. So those kind of give me the greatest joy. Is just and people are always very kind, and they write back and say, "Oh, thanks so much," and this is great. And to see on LinkedIn, when I share on LinkedIn, and people write, "Oh, way to go, that's great," and it's always kind of satisfying to know that you're writing something, or you're putting out a product that people are enjoying and appreciate.
That I think those stories are just much easier to read too, right? Like when you're learning about somebody, and from my perspective, it's always fun to read about people doing great things, and you guys certainly do a good job at that. So I'm going to flip the script on you here a little bit. Who are the 3 people, living or dead, that you would want to have dinner with?
Oh, good one. All right.
It's a good one because you wrote it.
Yeah, I stole it from the business school magazine at the University of Michigan, because they always did this. I'm going to steal that one, and I finally did. I would probably, I would have my Irish grandmother, who I mentioned earlier, because she's a hoot, and I probably would have her husband, my grandfather. I didn't know as well. When I was younger, he was always kind of sick. He was 20 years older than my grandmother, but he was a streetcar conductor in Detroit, and she rode the streetcar to her housekeeping job, and he liked her, and so he let her ride for free. So she got to save a nickel or whatever, and so she thought that was pretty good. And so they ended up marrying him. But I didn't get to know him. I was always scared of him because he was always in bed, and he was always kind of, ill, and had a glass eye and stuff. And it was just kind of like, so I would like to kind of know him a little bit more than I did as a 8-year-old or whatever. And probably I'd like to have my father back, just because he always gave me a lot of great advice. Being in the business as long as he had, and my 2 older brothers also in the newspaper business, and so I kind of leaned on them too. But I like to share some stories and ask questions. I've still got questions I need to ask about this business and how to navigate it at times. So those would be my 3.
Is there anybody in the press or somebody that like you modeled anything after, or that you admired growing up, from aside from your father, but maybe somebody that was well known that you liked their style, or different influencers that might have had an influence on you over the years?
Yes, I think especially when I was writing, feature stories, let's say, where you got a little bit more poetic license to be, offbeat or silly, as opposed to, a hard news story about, someone being murdered or something, where there's not a lot of room for jokes and, but I like, there was a sports columnist at the Free Press a long time ago named Mike Downey, who was always kind of very irreverent, kind of funny. Mike Royko, who was a longtime Chicago columnist, who, kind of very offbeat. But I kind of gravitated towards the people who were, who took some chances, a little bit daring, a little bit outrageous when they could. And so, I pushed the envelope a lot whenever I could, and just in my writing and kind to, trying to be a little bit bolder and snarky and, that kind of. So those are kind of the writers that I always kind of looked up to, and because they took chances, and so I like that.
It's a fascinating industry to me, one that I don't know a ton about. My wife's uncle actually has worked at the Cronkite School down in at Arizona State for a long time, long time. And so we've had the pleasure of going through the Cronkite School numerous times, and it is so cool to see how everything comes together and the talented people that work, in with papers, with online content, behind cameras for the news. It truly is a unique gift, and it's fascinating that your entire family has been involved with this industry. It's cool.
Yeah, it's and when I left the newspaper business to go work at the University of Michigan, I thought that's it, I'm done. I'm going to go do some, if I ever leave University of Michigan, I'm not going back to newspapers because, been there, done that, and I went. But I found the pull, that to come back, something I just know and I love, and passionate about. But, so I sit in on we have a morning meeting on Zoom, and we talk about what's going to be on the website today, what's going to be in the paper, the following Monday. And all these plans and how they, Monday comes and you're like, okay, we only have these, this small amount of stories. We're going to, but the paper's this big. We're going to have to, find some news out there. And then every day, a few more things get added to the pile. And I was just before I came on here, I was the designer and the kind of the editor who kind of makes sure the trains run on time. We're talking about, and he was laid out the centerpiece for page 3, I think. And then he just found out, well, you can't do that because the centerpiece photo had a picture of a guy sitting in the car, but then the front page photo was going to be a guy sitting in the car too, a different guy. And so he said, well, we can't have the same but similar. So he had to rip up this whole page that he already designed. So he was all mad about stomping around. I need a whiskey, and he goes, "Someone give me some whiskey." So and then talking about the old days of newspapers. Everybody had a whiskey in their drawer, and it was great. And so it's it's full of stress, and there's times you want to scream and you pound your computer because something's gone wrong or something's happened, but then Monday comes and there's paper and it looks like it was a piece of cake, effortless, but there's a ton of work that goes behind the scenes.
It's got to be cool to see the visual, the impact that you're having visually, right? You put all this work into it, and then in the mail comes, or you probably have it ahead of time, but in the mail comes this magazine, and to see your name on an article or see your name throughout the magazine has to be pretty cool.
It's satisfying. This wasn't anything that I had written about anything, but I'm going to either June or August issue was about women in automotive and how do you get more women into service industry. And there was a technician down in San Antonio, and so they had a staff photographer, and they took this picture of her, and it's this great photo, and we were just all the designer was like, oh my god, this is the greatest photo. We was all kind of blown away just because it was just it was like a painting almost. It was her looking badass, and all the tools were on her, and it was just, and I was just mesmerized by it. I said, this is the greatest cover we've ever done. It's says so many things, so powerful, and I just stared at it for a long time. This is cool. This is cool. This is great. And it was it was a great issue, and it was a great story. But that photo was just, really, I think, said so many things. It was awesome.
That it's cool in general. Everything you guys do is cool. You do a lot of really informative stories that are well written, really easy to read, and just want to thank you for taking time out of your busy day today to join me and talk a little bit more about it. It's one that an industry that I'm captivated by, but specifically you and your works and all of the progress that you've made in a short amount of time is really impressive. You've had a really positive impact there, and we always enjoy reading your stuff. Everything that you put together is amazing. So thank you so much for everything you're
thanks
doing.
for those kind words, and thanks to everybody out there who reading automotive news and Quick Stop Journal, and keep reading so I can keep working and earning the paycheck.
You keep doing what you're doing.
To put through college, okay?
You keep doing what you're doing. You're not going to have a problem finding people that want to read it. So thanks again, Dan. Pleasure to talk to you as always, and hope to have you back on again at some point.
I love it. Thanks.
That wraps up this week's episode of Beyond the Wrench. Be sure to tune in next week for another brand new episode. As a reminder, don't forget to rate and follow Beyond the Wrench on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps us get Beyond the Wrench in front of other fantastic shop owners, managers, technicians, and dealers just like you, so we can continue to help improve, promote, and grow this amazing industry. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll be back next week.